this really is a moment of liberation for the country. I think the vibe has changed. That's real. And I feel it everywhere I go. I haven't met a hostile person in the last 6 weeks anywhere in the United States. People seem happier. And I've been trying to think about, like, what actually changed. I mean, obviously, Trump won. Kamala Harris lost. But which is great. But what really happened was the spell was shattered. And here's what the spell was. And I think all of us, to one degree or another, were under its influence for like at least the past 8 years, but probably like the past 30 years. The spell was this. No, a spell is an incantation. It's a phrase or idea that, if repeated enough, gains power. And the way you break a spell is by saying boo really loudly and waking up everyone to the truth that the spell is fake. And it had been 30 years since anyone did that. And here's what the spell was. The spell was that the tiny group of people who run the country to their own benefit represented, like, the rest of the world. That everybody agreed with all the dumb pieties they were screaming at you, that all the good people were on the other side, and that you were somehow alone, trapped in your house thinking freaky far-right things that you should be embarrassed of. And all the truly decent, moral, progressive, open-minded people were on the other side, laughing at you. And that you were some kind of medieval freak, probably dangerous. And what the election showed was the opposite was true. The fact that Trump won not just the majority of the popular vote, but huge segments of unrelated parts of the society told the entire story. Trump won young people, Hispanics. He won Muslims in Southeast Michigan. He won Orthodox Jews in upstate New York. He basically won everybody except for the tiny core of super unhappy people who controlled everything. And I remember thinking about 10 years ago, having grown up in an affluent neighborhood in California and lived in a bunch of other affluent neighborhoods my whole life, that the politics of the Democratic Party reminded me very much of my neighbor's, my buddy's, divorced mom in 1978 in La Jolla, California. And I'll never forget sitting in his backyard with his mom, who had become like an artist after getting divorced, an artist. And she was sitting there wearing sandals. She had like long frizzy hair, and she was smoking a Moor, which was like the cigarette of choice for divorced ladies in the 70s. It was like really long and thin and brown. And it was a sign of liberation, personal liberation. Like, I don't need a man anymore. I'm on my own. I am woman, hear me roar. I am feminist. I am the future. And I remember sitting in the backyard of their $4 million house by the pool as she ranted about the patriarchy and capitalism, smoking her Moor. And I remember thinking, this is, well, she's obviously crazy, but this is the unhappiest person I've ever met. I kind of can't wait to get out of here, take off with my buddy and go play. This woman is miserable, and that informs all of her views. So that was, 1978, 79. I wake up in like 2015, and that's the entire Democratic Party sound like my friend's angry feminist mom, like pissed at her husband, who she hates because he cheated on her, but you can kind of understand why, but he's still paying for the house with the pool. And I'm like, those politics, that very specific politics of affluent, unhappy people who have everything but really nothing inside at all, who've reached like the terminus, the end stage of consumer society, where you can't distract yourself or medicate yourself enough to avoid like the basic tragedy of your life, which is it has no meaning. And rather than solve that by believing in something with inherent value like God, you externalize all your disappointment and hate onto everybody else. Your life has been a total failure. You have no skills. Your kids hate you, but you still have the moral high ground because you've occupied it early and defended it ruthlessly. So people who had everything to be ashamed of diverted attention from their own failures by screaming at you about your moral inferiority, and you bought it. And I bought it, and all of us kind of bought it. It was like, you can't say this stuff out loud because it's embarrassing. And like, polite people don't say those things out loud, like obvious things. Like, you're idiotic. And no, boys can't become girls. And no, you don't get to run our foreign policy or energy policy. You can't even change the tire on your Volvo. You're useless and dumb. And a compassionate society would not let you starve to death, but you're not allowed to run everything. Nobody ever said that because they occupied this place of moral authority. And they had like kind of the predictable institutions to enforce their rule, the cultural institutions, especially the universities. And if I could just, I want to say one more time, Charlie Kirk has done more personally to break that spell by succeeding without a college degree than anybody I've ever met. Rather than whining about college indoctrination and how it's, a waste of money and time, he just goes out without a college degree and just becomes a crazy success through hard work and intelligence and makes the point himself by his own life, which is, by the way, how you convince people, not by yelling at them or even trying to persuade them, but by living in a way that proves your point. If you're onto something, if you're on the right path, your life should reflect it. You should be joyful. You should have meaningful, deep relationships with the people around you. You should have the respect of the people who work for you. You should have the love of your spouse, et cetera, et cetera. If you are telling me that college is a bad idea, show me a better way, and he has. These are very obvious observations, but for some reason, for like 30 years, we ignored them, and we allowed people who not only have no moral authority, who should feel deep shame and be engaged in a long process of deep reflection that includes ashes and sackcloth. Really, living in some, faraway place in the desert, repenting full-time for, say, the Iraq War. They should not be on television giving instructions for how we proceed at all. But we all kind of sat there and were like, well, we kind of have to take it. And my kids can't get jobs because in a country with a Civil Rights Act, they're the wrong color, but we kind of have to take it. And, my children aren't going to own anything, they're going to rent, but that's just the way it is in a free market system. We kind of have to take it. And by the way, the people who are doing all of this are, we will acknowledge, in some sense, better than we are. We call them the elites. They did go to Princeton. You went to Penn State. And we all kind of played along with it. Go Penn State, by the way. That's exactly right. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Mr. Penn State. But the point is, the Trump election showed that what they claimed was a far-right, boutique, crazed, dangerous ideology that actually was a threat sufficient that the Department of Homeland Security and the U.S. military ought to be keeping an eye on you and they ought to have a right to spy on you, that supposedly crazed fringe ideology was in fact shared by pretty much everybody other than my buddy's divorced mom and other unhappy people. And what do we learn from that? We learned that the whole thing was an illusion. And the biggest illusion of all was the race stuff. That was the biggest illusion of all. And they can no longer say that people who don't want to go along with their program are racists because look at the election results. Look at the election results. Now, no one should be surprised by that. By the way, if you don't live in Bethesda, if you're out in the world, you know that, like, normal people don't want crime and homelessness and drugs and open borders. It doesn't matter what they look like or where they're from. Nobody wants that. No normal person wants that. I remember when I lived in Washington, an actual conversation I had at an actual dinner party that if you put it on film, in the middle of a movie, people would be like, that's just not believable, that never happened, but it actually happened. I was in the middle of getting lectured in a very polite way by one of my neighbors who was a very nice person, but obviously a lot better than me because she was a Hillary Clinton voter. And she said, but she was fundamentally a nice person, but totally convinced of her moral authority. And she said to me, I have a lot of problems with your views on immigration. Frankly, I don't think you're a racist. I just want to be clear. She's my neighbor. I don't think you're a racist. But basically, she said, you're a racist. Okay, so I was trying to, defend. Well, actually, I think countries need borders. I'm trying to be polite. 15 minutes later, she goes, My housekeeper loves you. Would you sign something for her? I was like, your housekeeper from Belgium? No, from El Salvador. Oh, right. So I'm such a nice person. I was like trying to be a Christian. I didn't say, so you think I'm a racist, but your Salvadoran housekeeper's like fully on board with my racist program? Tell me how that works. And then you realize it's not just her Salvadoran housekeeper, it's every Salvadoran housekeeper, actually, in the world. There's not a liberal one. Not one. There's literally, if you can find a liberal Salvadoran housekeeper, call me. I don't believe you. They're just not liberal. You know, whatever you think, they're just not liberal. And a lot of America's not liberal in the way that they envision it. They're just not. They think if you break the law, you should be punished. They don't think it's cool to have somebody ODing on fentanyl right outside your house. By the way, they'd like to own things. They don't think that, like, the Uber economy is the real economy. They'd like to have a little house somewhere and own a car. You know, they think credit card debt is bad, and they're upset about it, and they talk about it because they're right on all counts. So these election results, if you look at them, and I would recommend everyone do so, not just because you love Trump, but because the long era of darkness is over, actually. It's over. We'll have political debates going forward. You know, you've got your ideas, I've got my ideas, we can debate them. But I honestly don't think ever again in my lifetime will the richest people in the country be able to point a finger in your face and say, your position is too immoral to discuss, and if you keep talking, we're going to put you in jail. That has been their position. And they will never again get away with that. Ever. And if they think that boys can become girls and should compete on the swim team, that's fine. They're going to have to explain exactly how that works. And if they think that Ukraine's borders are more important than our borders, that's fine, but they're going to have to explain why. And if they think that it's okay for, like, 3 companies owned by their donors to buy up all the residential housing in the country and rent it back to you at a higher rate, they're going to have to tell you why that's a good idea. They can never again just do exactly what they want by waving away your concerns with an epithet. Shut up, racist won't work anymore.